Is that right? There we go. Now everybody should probably get a pop-up that asks you to click your consent. Cool.
Thank you.
All right, good. Yeah.
Oh, I said I thought I hit it, but once I passed off the hosting, I think it turned off. Thank you.
Oh, that could be no worries at all. No worries. All right. Welcome, everybody. So let's talk about impasse. I want to give us a hypothesis to work with this morning about impasse, and I'm going to be a little harsh about it. I define impasse as the exact moment when the mediator ran out of skills. And I look at people who negotiate and who mediate, who use impasse, and I hear the young students now coming out of peer mediation programs and master's degree programs saying, and I declared an impasse. And to me, those are like words that should never pass a mediator's tongue. So I'm going to be a little strict and evangelistic about this, because I really think that while there are lots of benefits from every mediation, whether it settles or not, and I think we can all agree on that, I think we also have to look in the mirror and say, in the private sector, when they hire us and they pay us thousands of dollars to sit between them, I think they're hiring us to resolve the case. And I recognize, again, that's extreme, but for today's purposes, I think it's useful to us. So for today's purposes, I want to sort of close the door metaphorically and look at us here in this Zoom and say, if we're just mediators with just our mediator hat on, and we're not advocates, and we're not insurance adjusters, and we're not real parties in interest, can we take responsibility and say, let's work under the hypothesis that the majority of impasses that we encounter in our mediations could be our fault? And the reason I ask us to do that is because I think that's the way we learn the best. If we say, sure, there are other things that went wrong in this mediation, but some of them I could have prevented had I done a better job. And I think that's how we get better and we sharpen our tool and we settle more cases. And I'm talking about the difference between settling 80% and settling 98%. And I assume that that's the goal we all have. So can we agree to work with that kind of a premise today, and for us to own responsibility, just for the sake of this conversation, for impasse in general? Yeah? All right, let me see a quick show of hands so that I get an idea of the experience level in the group. How many of you have mediated more than 40 cases? Let me just raise your hands. Good. Okay. How many have mediated more than 100? All right. A few of us. Good, 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 good. More than 250? Okay. All right, good. So I've mediated about 2,600 and have been doing this, like Marcy said, pretty close to 30 years. It's 28 and a half years or something like that at this point. This program rises out of everything I've done wrong over the years. When a case doesn't settle and you go home and you toss and turn in bed, yeah, I know we're not supposed to attach ourselves to outcome, but we do, let's be honest. And I'm trying to think of what could I have done? What should I have done? What did I do that I shouldn't have done? And I go back and I hash all of this out. This is where I came to realize what went wrong today, I should have fixed earlier in the process at some point, right? So one of the first things I'd like to do, I'm going to share my screen. And I would like, since we're a nice small group, I would like for us to, oh, you like that lighthouse, by the way, on my desktop? Somebody gave me the book, The Lighthouse Effect. And if you haven't read it, it's a wonderful book about how we land in the lives of other people and the impact that we have on them. And as mediator, I like to think of that as we're the lighthouse in the storm. I started the mediation program for the Santa Barbara courts and was an employee of the court for a year up there. And they gave me zero budget to decorate my office. So I went out and found a poster that I got a frame for like $3 or something and put on the back of my wall behind me of a lighthouse shining in a storm. because I think that's part of our role as mediators, to help guide people out of the storm of conflict and litigation and help them find a better way. So anyway, that's my inspiration at the moment. What I'd like for us to do now is list out loud, and this will begin the interactive portion of the workshop, but list out loud all the causes of so-called impasse that we can think of. What are all the barriers that get in our way and keep us from settling a case on a given day?
Emotions get in the way.
All right.
Getting to the money too soon, talking about money too soon.
All right, good. What else?
Not having the right people in the room.
All right. Good. Everybody's seeing this, by the way, right? My little fancy Word
Yeah,
document.
I've got to get, somehow I have lost it. Hang on.
All right. Okay, what else? What other causes of impasse do we run into?
Sometimes a lack of understanding of the process.
Thanks. Okay,
I
good.
think,
What else?
I think, in my experience, sometimes it's not preparing enough in advance for the actual sit down.
And who's not prepared enough in advance?
Well, the parties, the people who are coming to sit down, the people who are going to be sitting in the room.
All right, lack of party
not ready.
preparation.
Right, they're not ready.
Good, good. What else?
On that point, I would add lack of a pre-mediation brief. I find them extremely helpful.
Good, good. All right, what
I'd
else?
add lack of mediator preparation as well.
Thank you. Good. You're getting the theme here. Good. What else?
Quitting too soon.
Yeah. I actually sold educational books door to door between my junior and senior years of college. So I spent 13 weeks knocking on people's doors from 8 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night or something like that, 6 days a week, and had some fantastic sales training in order to do that. And in that process, listened to Zig Ziglar a lot. And he would say, every no means is that you're one step closer to the yes. It's a little different than Roger Fisher. All right, great. What else?
What if it's just the wrong mediator? So an inexperienced mediator with like maybe a lack of expertise in the area.
Good, good. What else?
Parties getting discouraged.
Yeah, and I think that goes along with telling parties that they should expect an impasse. And in fact, sometimes I tell them when they hit impasse, they've really made progress because now they really know exactly what needs to be figured out.
All right. So I think I understand what you're saying. Give it to me in a couple of words. How can we say that?
Preparing for impasse.
Good, good. Yeah. And taking some of the sting out of it, maybe, right?
Right.
All right, good. What else gets in our way?
Kind of building on Natasha's comments, sometimes mediator missteps,
Such as?
miscommunicating a demand and a response.
Good. I'm working with my narrow columns here. Good. What else? What else?
Party intransigence.
Spell it for me. Oh, I must have gotten it right. Word didn't underline it for me. All right, good. What else? So we've focused a lot on factual and process. We touched a little bit on emotions. How about this? Whoops. How about that one? Does that ever get in the way? Ego?
Absolutely.
One I haven't heard from you that I often hear is attorney other interests,
Right.
shall we say?
Yep.
Yeah. All right, good. What else?
Um,
I often hear lack of authority.
right.
Mhm.
Right.
I hear a lot of times plaintiff case articulation. And by that, I mean really a recitation of causation or a detailed breakdown of damages that the defense can run up the flagpole with the insurance carrier far enough in advance or something like that. Right? They haven't articulated what the risk is and what the damage is for the defense to kind of circle the wagons and say, what do we do about this? What else?
Maybe the mediator is afraid to ask questions.
Good. All right. Good. I like that.
Mistrust,
Say it one more time, sorry.
mistrust,
Of?
all the parties
Uh-huh. All right.
and the mediator. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody involved.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, some of these are like sort of, some of the things I'm thinking of are splinters of some of the other topics, but like sometimes a mediator crosses the line too soon and, gets a little bit more evaluative than the party is ready for. If you do that too soon, you can really turn off the party from trusting
Yep.
you, and then
Mhm.
you're in a crash unless you get them.
I was once hired to be what I would call a negotiation coach. An attorney called and hired me to sit on his side of the table in his room. So not as mediator, but as his advocate. He was representing himself. And he said, I know I have a fool for a client. I know I'm right on the law. And I know I'm too emotional about the numbers and the dollars and the damages because this thing destroyed my entire practice after 20 some years. He said, I need you to help me figure out when to ask for how much so that we can get it. And we spelled out the case, we articulated the damages and made a demand of $1.3 million. And this particular retired judge mediator walked in the other room, disappeared for an hour and a half, came back in, and his first words were, feels to me like it's about 300. And we were like, what? Like, hold on. So yes, it can absolutely dissolve mediator trust, can't it? Great.
Sometimes it's not listening carefully.
Ah. And that's the mediator?
Anybody.
Uh-huh. Okay, good. What else?
The risk
False
level,
assumptions.
False assumptions? All right, good. And the risk what?
the risk level of the parties.
Ah,
Depends on what they're willing to risk, and sometimes it gets down to once they realize or properly look at the case, they still may have different levels of risk aversion or tolerance.
right. So I would think risk aversion would drive them towards settlement and towards certainty, but risk tolerance might make them gamblers and think they can roll the dice and, hey, I got a 50-50 chance of hitting the lottery here or something like that, right?
That's better word for it, yes.
All right, good, good. All right. Other things that get in our way?
The mediator's commitment to resolution.
Good, good. Something else that I hear a lot that y'all haven't mentioned yet is shadow parties. The guy's in the mediation, but he can't really make a decision until he calls his wife. And when he does at 4 p.m, she goes, "You're willing to do what?" Because she hasn't been there all day with us, listening to the reasons and the logic and the risk analysis and all of that, right? So sometimes there are parties in the background that we may not know until later or at all that they may be driving the bus in reality.
Yep.
All right. Other things?
Lack of patience with the process.
Got it. And that's on whose part?
Everybody.
Linda, you have seen some of the tough ones, haven't you? That's how we earn our stripes. All right, good. More?
Sometimes, this has happened to me more than once. Sometimes it's a total surprise. And that by that, I mean, you think that you've gotten the parties to a point pre-mediation where they're going to come in and be in the sort of settlement mood.
Yeah.
And one side comes out and just like puts a high number out there and then just starts fighting for it.
Got it.
And you sort of shake your head and say, what happened? Like, am I in a different universe? That's happened to me a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. All right, good. I mean, that's always a quandary we have to face, right? What do you do when somebody comes out with a $150,000 case and a $3 million demand at 9 a.m.? Yeah. All right, good. What else?
I would add opening sessions. I personally do not like opening sessions because in my experience, they're just a chance for people to vent. And so I avoid them, at least at the beginning of a mediation session.
Got it. Okay, so too much venting at the beginning, and there's been a lot of writing about how that with plaintiffs, we've learned, we thought that, oh, they need to vent, they need their day in court, they have to tell their story, they need the other side to understand how hard this was on them and how it affected their lives. And neuroscience has since come out and sort of said, what we're doing is re-traumatizing those people by having them relive it. And then we have to go and get them all the way back from that place to get them back to the table. We have to move them from their survival instinct part of their brain to their emotional part of their brain, and then to their reticular activator, to their prefrontal cortex, where they're back in logic and reasoning and linear thinking and can process those things that we need them to process. But by having them retell their stories, sometimes it takes them out of the rational part of their brains, and we have a lot more work to do to get them back.
Well, there are two schools of thought of that, right?
Yes.
I mean, you look at the 9/11 proceedings, even more recently, the proceedings around that building collapse in Florida. And I think people do need to vent, at least in my own experience.
Mhm.
The question is, when do they vent? And if they vent too early, or worse, they vent in front of the adverse party, that can be really bad. But if they go and they vent with a mediator in private session, I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah, it can, and we just have to be mindful, watching them really closely and listening, like somebody said earlier, to make sure that we're not losing them down a rabbit hole when they start to vent. If they're venting for our understanding, that's helpful. And if they're venting because they're still so emotional, I had a court here in LA that did an early mediation pilot program, and they sent cases, they ordered them into mediation 3 to 4 months from filing. This was a wrongful death of a 42-year-old husband and his late 30s widow, who had a 5 and 7-year-old at home. Somebody's got some background noise, you may want to mute. But had a 5 and a 7-year-old at home, was in mediation 120 days from the time of losing her husband, who, by the way, left a $50,000 life insurance policy, a mortgage on a new then $450,000 home. And she hadn't worked since she'd had the second child. This woman was in utter shock. She was in survival mode. How am I going to ever make this? And she was fighting. She disclosed to me not to off herself because she was so distraught and lost and didn't know what and here she is in mediation, and we're trying to get her to make a business decision about the case against the doctor. So timing is everything, including when it comes to venting. That's a really good point. We have a lot to be mindful of. Good.
And I know,
Lee, I have one more. Different objectives by the parties, different objectives by the lawyers.
Yep. I agree. Good. So that's part of what we said about attorneys having other interests.
Right.
But different objectives is true. You know, sometimes they want to come in and teach the plaintiff's bar a lesson, or the plaintiff wants to show the defense that you know, this case is worth more because I'm on it. We have a lot of that ego here in LA. I'm sure you do around the country too. But you know, we have those guys who walk in with the Rolexes on their arms that are the size of a small hotel with diamonds and blah, 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 and telling, I don't touch a case for less than $1 million.
Right.
I'll make sure the jury understands, you know,
Yep.
because it's all about you. Thank you.
We can trade names. Right.
Exactly. So good, good, good. And yeah, different. So different, that's different lawyer objectives, but different party objectives. What comes up when we think about different party objectives?
Money versus apology.
Or even just acceptance of the blame, not just an apology.
Yeah,
Or a point of principle. Sometimes it's a point of principle.
yeah, yeah. And one I find a lot that can get in our way is the desire to punish.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, good. So let's keep listing. Anything else? We've got a couple more we can add.
I would say failure to look at alternative solutions. My practice is mostly in technology cases. And so I'll see the parties arguing about money, and I may step in and say, well, what about ownership of the intellectual property you're fighting about? Maybe we ought to divide that up. And so all of a sudden there's a non-monetary piece on the table, and that can sometimes get people thinking in a much more cooperative way.
Or even creatively with a license or some other fixes like that help them share in a way, if it's possible going forward, so that everybody's legally protected, of course, but different than, all or nothing, right?
Exactly.
Good, good, good. I like that one. What else?
I think there are cases and there are cases, and by that I mean, I'm sorry. Going back to the point about, I've had several construction cases where I know both parties have been down the mediation road many, many times. And sometimes they come to the mediation and they want to talk to each other. Or they'd like the mediator to get them in a place where they can talk to each other. So I would submit that there are times where in a case like that, if you know that you're familiar with those people or you've seen them before, and you know they know how to do it and they do it right, not going to an opening session right away sometimes can be a hindrance.
Yep.
So
very, very good.
There are some cases that can be played a different way depending on the party's experience with the process.
All right, good, good. And so that everybody knows, the reason Peter sounds muffled like that is because he's in an airport wearing a mask and still joined us. So appreciate that. All right, good. So let's just take a look at this list. I'm keeping an eye on the clock too, because we want to make sure we get through all of this. This is what we wake up to on a given Monday morning when we're getting dressed and about to go to our mediation, whether it's virtual or in person. And these are the things that we know could be awaiting us as we say good morning. Take a good look at this list and imagine that we still get out of bed Monday morning and still get dressed and still go do this every day. Right? This is a pretty daunting list of everything that could go wrong, right?
Right.
Yeah. Good morning. So here's what I'd like to do with all of this. Again, let's assume for the moment that we're going to hold ourselves accountable for this and responsible for it and figure out what we should be doing about it and when. So in order to do that, the first thing I want to do is have us compartmentalize this. So I'm going to use a five-step breakdown of the mediation process, sort of stages of the process. This is the one that we use at Pepperdine in the mediating and litigated case program and all of the programs there. And it's just to help us separate and talk about the different times and stages of a mediation. So Chris Moore in his book broke it down into 13 different stages. Others have had as many as 27 and so on. Some say there are only 3 stages: get them in the room, get them settled, and get it documented. But so we're going to work with this just so that we have a ballpark to talk about timing. So we call convening everything that happens before we walk in the room the day of the mediation. So this is all categories related to prepping and briefing and pre-mediation communications and confirming dates and expectations of who's going to attend and all those sorts of things before we say good morning at 9 o'clock Monday morning. This intro stage, introduction, the opening, this is what we do when they walk in the door at 9 a.m. Monday morning. Hi, I'm Marcy. I'm going to be your mediator this morning. Nice to see you all. And then we do what we're going to do after that, how we introduce ourselves, how we introduce the process, and how we manage expectations the minute the starter's pistol fires. So I tend to think of mediation as a race in that we all line up at the starting line at 9 o'clock Monday morning and somebody fires a starter's pistol and we begin, but it's a different kind of a race. In my mind, it's not who gets to the finish line first, like a 100-yard dash. It's more, can we leave the starting line altogether? And can we arrive at the finish line altogether? And every single thing that I do, from hello, do you do mediations? Or do you have a date available for us next month? Everything I do from there forward is solely focused on the finish line. That's all I'm ever thinking about. If you saw Glenn Ross, you're familiar with the always be closing phrase, the ABC. I am always closing from the very beginning of hello with my mind on the finish line. So my introduction and opening is thinking more about that than necessarily how to kick off the process. I'm thinking, how do I kick off this process so we get it resolved at 5 or 8 p.m. today or 1 a.m. or whatever it takes. Next is the communication stage. This we're going to refer to as all of the surfacing of the conflict and telling their story and communicating what's going on for them and all of that, that's separate and apart from the horse trading. Because the next stage, the negotiation stage, is all the horse trading. This is the back and forth. This is finding concessions. It's building outside of the box solutions like we just spoke about. And then the closing stage, how we button it up, how we document it, how we get them on the same page and create a mutual understanding around closure. Now that may mean some days we haven't agreed yet. But I will never, ever, ever in my lifetime declare an impasse or a failure or anything else like that. And we'll talk about that when we get to that stage, assuming we can get there in the next 30 minutes. So let's focus first on the convening stage. Everything that we do as mediators before they walk into our room. And this may seem a little elementary, but I promise you it's not. This is only a discussion in service of how we can prevent impasse by sometimes front loading our process and being more mindful about each stage of it. So the convening stage and everything that we do before they walk into our rooms, let's make this red and let's ask ourselves, of all these causes of impasse, which of these could conceivably be dealt with or addressed before they ever walk into our room during the convening stage? So which of these should we be focusing on? Let's not focus as much on how to deal with it or what we do or say, but just compartmentalizing which of these can we deal with at that stage?
Party prep, lack of briefs, mediation prep.
Boom. Boom, good. Like a mediator prep, yep, good.
Wrong mediator,
Yep.
lack of expertise.
Uh-huh.
Who's going to be there and who ought to be there?
And where is that one?
Well, that's wrong people and shadow parties.
All right, where is, help me find, oh, there's shadow parties, boom. Sometimes I'm too close to the screen to be able to see the whole thing as well as y'all. All right, good. What else can we deal with before they walk into our room?
Lack of authority.
Great, boom. All right. Case articulation, right? This is before.
Attorney surprise.
Help me find that one.
And on the right column.
Ah, I got attorney surprise. Is that one? That one?
Yeah.
Good.
Extreme openings.
Yeah. Yeah, we can talk about that from the get-go. How about this one? Right?
Yep.
Sometimes we have to have the courage to ask the difficult questions early.
Yeah.
So
Lack of joint session.
So let me just speak for one more moment on this one, because in the real world, we have to build a practice, right? Marcy's after us to build a practice and build relationships and build rapport and keep them coming back and all that sort of thing, right? So in the convening stage, our focus and sometimes our egos, and sometimes, look, we all become mediators for different reasons, right? Some of us like being the hero. Some of us like being liked. Some of us like being in charge and telling people what to do. We all have different reasons why we enjoy doing this. But at the beginning, those of us who lean toward being people pleasers can be a little bit too friendly with the parties. And that can keep us from asking the difficult questions, like, tell me what your objectives are for the mediation in a private conversation with counsel, assuming we're going to give ourselves the opportunity to have that meeting and have that discussion, right? So we're weighing our ego and our desire to be liked and building rapport with asking tough questions that might put them on their heels, and if we're not careful, make them defensive or lose trust in us too soon. So we're weighing that very delicate balance, but we could leave ourselves open to a potential impasse late in the day if we didn't learn this when we had the opportunity to. So I want to plant that seed and have you think about your pre-mediation communications and how, and even your when they arrive in your office, if you're in person, or in separate Zoom rooms before we put them together, if we put them together, and think about that balance between building rapport and asking the tough questions. So sorry, somebody said another one after that.
I think it was joint sessions,
Okay, so
lack of joint session or joint sessions vent.
that don't work. Okay, so how are we going to deal with that as mediators before they've walked into our room? Walk me through that.
I try to talk to the lawyers in advance about that issue because I happen to think they're helpful. I know some people disagree, but I also think depending on what they're going to say, they're not helpful. So sometimes you're 2 steps back before you set the stage.
I agree. So let me pick on a phrase you used just to highlight it so we're all hearing it. Because one of the things that we said early on here is, I've lost it now, but something about listening, right? As mediators, we listen very carefully, very differently to language than counsel and advocates do, right? I mean, I assume they're listening for causation, liability, damages, and case precedent and all those sorts of things. We're listening differently. And I talked to them about, and while that's true, part of our job is to inform them about joint session and perhaps what some of the benefits are or what we expect if we do one and those sorts of things. The other side of that coin that has to accompany it is asking them about. So
that's what I assume that you were, that's what I meant to say, because I have to understand where they're coming from. It doesn't matter what I think, really.
Exactly. So let's look at like Len Riskin's grid, for example, for those of you who are familiar. Mediators can be very directive in their style and say, this is what we do. We're going to have a joint session. Here's how I expect it's going to go. Here's the behavior I do and don't want out of you. And here's what I'm looking for out of that. And other mediators are more facilitative in their style and say, so tell me how you feel about the prospect of getting everyone together. And some will do a blend and will say, let me give you my thoughts about getting people together in a joint session and what some of the benefits of that can be and what some of my intentions would be. But then let me hear how you feel about that, because we all know every lawyer's had one horrific joint session that ended up badly, yelling, screaming, client crying, every worst case scenario, and never again wants to do a joint session because that one experience was so bad. So part of what they have to do, as I think you've said, is trust us to manage that if there are benefits that can be derived from that, right? So I just want us to be very mindful of when we're telling and when we're asking, and make sure that that's consistent with what we're trying to do in that moment with those folks. Because if we're telling them, we're not learning what they think about it. And if we're asking them, we could be giving them too much control over our process. So a lot to think about there. I just wanted to highlight that as we think about how we do what we do. These are some of the finer points that make the difference in what we learn and how they receive us and trust us.
I think one issue here that's important is what's the relationship between the parties. So if the parties are competitors, which often happens in my technology cases, maybe you don't want to get them together.
Mhm.
But if the parties are, say, a supplier to the other party, they might actually have a business relationship after this dispute. And
Yep.
that might be a good thing to try to get a sense of, these are just human beings who try to feed their families, and they're not at war with each other all the time. In fact, they may do business again.
And may need each other, right? If they're big enough players in the field, they're cutting off their own nose sometimes if they ruin a relationship with a supplier or a big customer. Brilliant. So I'm going to highlight mistrust of the parties. I don't know that we can necessarily manage that in the convening stage, but I think that's what you're talking about there. If we were to pick one of these to attach that to, right? All right. So what about this one? What about mistrust of the mediator? Is that something that we can manage before the process starts?
Well, I think so. I mean, I know that it's starting to get loud here, and I apologize, but I
Sorry.
think that you want to let them know that, you know, you can be facilitated, you can be evaluated, you can be a combination of both, depending on how things go, and kind of get their reactions to those things. And also tell them that, you know, and explain to them that this is not about, you know, winning, quote unquote, winning the mediation and winning the mediator. It's more about, you know, what's the right, you know, what's getting to the answer that, you know, gives both parties value and that makes sense. And so in other words, I would tell them in advance that, you know, you're going to try to evaluate and take them down some of those roads during the process, and they should be prepared for you to, you know, to be devil's advocate, for taking down those roads, for taking them down those issues, and you know, getting their reaction so that you can figure out exactly what's the best course.
Terrific. So now that we've identified 40% or so of the causes of impasse that we can address during the convening stage before they ever walk in our doors, the next question then is, why don't we? And we have excuses like, oh, I'm too busy to do pre-mediation calls, or you know, things like that. Or we send out form letters that nobody reads because they read like form letters and things like that, right? So part of our goal this afternoon, is to have us think about our convening process in a way that puts more burden on us and on that part of the process than we may have been doing. So I'll tell you a quick little secret. When I started mediating 28 years ago, my first 5 or 6 years, I didn't get briefs from the parties. I literally walked in like I was trained at 9 o'clock Monday morning and said, good morning. I introduced myself, shook hands with everybody, and said, great, so what brings us here today? And mediated by the seat of my pants. I wasn't uncomfortable doing that, which is why I did it for so long, until I realized, especially we started during that process here in California, court-ordered mediations. So people were being ordered to this process. Attorneys were coming in completely unprepared. And finally, I started asking for briefs, not for me, and not because I felt I needed them. Listen to my ego, right? But also because I wanted the attorneys to prepare. I wanted them to pull this file out of their stack and write it up and articulate it and have to look some things up and be ready to go for the mediation. So thinking about what we do before we walk in the door and what we ask them to do or tell them to do, those are the things that help us think forward about this process. So if you're not doing pre-mediation phone calls, I'm going to strongly urge that you reconsider that. And then there's the decision about, do I do it with plaintiff and plaintiff's counsel and then separately with defense and defense counsel? Do I do it just with all the attorneys? There are pros and cons of each. We gain and lose different information based on who's on that call with us. I do them by Zoom because we can, right? It's easy. People are comfortable with Zoom now, and we can see their faces and we can see the reactions to each other. I can watch one lawyer cringe as the other one says something, or I can watch them laugh together because somebody's client is crazy or something like that, right? We learn so much before we ever walk in the room, including finding out about authority, making sure the plaintiff clearly articulates the case, building trust with them, having them prepare for each other and for things. When it comes to briefs, there are two things that I do that I think are unique. One is I always ask them, with a bit of an arbitration background too, I always ask them, do we want briefs to be consecutive? Contemporaneous, or do we want to phase them? In other words, do we want the demand from the plaintiff with a full breakdown and everything first, and then give defense a week to respond to that, or something like that, rather than having them all land together on, a Friday? So these are things that I like to have people think through, because all of this, neuroscientists say that it primes them. It gets them thinking about the case and about settlement and about their strategy and about how much they can share with the other party before we walk in the door, and all of these things, but only if we lead them to that. Because think about it, attorneys are used to showing up for a status conference with a judge who says, where's discovery at? When are you going to be ready? And let's set a date. And that's all they do. And so if we have a pre-mediation call and that's all we do, what a lost opportunity that is. What else do you all do before people walk in the door that you think is unique or extreme or most helpful to you? But what are some things that you do during this stage that you want to share with your colleagues right now?
Well, the one thing that I do, and maybe this isn't that novel, is in addition to everything you said about having communications with the parties during the prep phase of this, sometimes I've had calls with just the attorneys, sometimes I've called separately with each party. And the beauty of that process is that you actually can eliminate steps you have to go through once you sat down, and save time and leave time over at the actual sit down to really get to the meat of what has to be solved. But the one thing that I do is, after the mediation briefs are filed and exchanged, and about a week before we actually mediate, I have separate calls with each party. And I do that for a number of reasons. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's all right. Let me just jump in and say that when I do workshops like this for attorneys who represent clients in mediation, that's the number one thing they say they like the best. When we send a brief to the mediator and the mediator has read it and calls us in advance of the mediation with really good questions about the brief, or questions about opposing counsel's brief, and did we see this and did we notice that, and have we read that case, and those sorts of things. It shows them that we're engaged and involved, and it makes a big difference for them. I'm sorry, my phone's blowing up.
Right. And it also helps me know, like, is one client, on the ceiling now because of something they read. And the media, am I going to be walking into a room where one side is really like hot about what they read or what they heard, what they saw, or what was alleged?
Good.
So
All right.
It's good information.
Good. So just in the interest of time, let's hear from a couple other people quickly. What else do you do?
I think if there's something that seems particularly contested, that the parties should remember that they need to provide that documentation to the mediator and the other side so that we can clarify exactly why it's being so hotly contested.
Right. If we walk in and there's an informational bust, a factual bust, or a case that they're both interpreting in their favor, we want to understand why, right? Great point. What else?
I'll invite parties to send me any information that they think might be helpful or pertinent, pleadings, what have you, discovery.
So you're just reading a ton to get prepared, right?
Yeah, it shows them that you're interested. It also gives you an opportunity to find out things that they might not be sharing otherwise.
Good.
I also ask them to talk a little bit about the parties themselves. Because if there's some unique qualities or something a little quirky about a party, that they give me a heads up about that. If there's something that is particularly of interest to one of the parties, I want to know about that as well.
So I encourage them all the time to share briefs if they will, and explain to them that nobody wants surprises at mediation. That's just going to keep us from getting it resolved. And I always invite them to send me what I call a pocket brief. And I tell them that can be in brief form, it can be a letter, it can be an email, or they can just call me or schedule a call or whatever, so that we can get on the phone together. But I want that information Linda just talked about. I want to know that before we walk in the room, because it helps me to prepare and be ready for them. So here's my suggestion. Arthur, you had a quick one, and then we'll move on.
A quick one, yeah. I also asked them if they have any assignments for me.
Yes, great.
Information to find out from the other side that might be important to their process.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. So here's what I'm going to suggest. Take 60 seconds right now, grab an old-fashioned pen and paper or something, and make a note for yourself of at least 5 things that you're going to do differently or better or more mindfully in your next mediations. Sometimes we get away from this. If we've done lots and lots of mediations, we forget or we drift from some of these things that actually, as we talk about them, they are difference makers, aren't they? So take 60 seconds and jot down some things that you're going to do to make your pre-mediation process more robust.
Mhm.
All right, I'm going to share my screen one more time here. So now, just to continue in this theme for another couple of moments as we start to near the top of the hour, let's just do one more of these to give you an idea of what we can do with the rest of them. And when this is over, I'm going to send an article to Marcy and Natasha for them to circulate that goes through all 5 of these. So you can think a little bit more about the rest of your process. But if we're now focusing on the introduction and the opening, so now we're jumping to, they've walked in your room virtually or in person, and it's 9 o'clock Monday morning and you're saying, good morning, hello. What can we do in how we describe the process, our role, how we introduce ourselves, and how we kick this thing off that could help address some of these issues that cause impasse, that get in our way, some of our barriers to settlement? Oh, by the way, wrong people in the room. I assume that that's one we address in the pre-mediation work also, right? So which of these can we address at hello? What about this?
I think we should acknowledge what has gone before, that we've had these convening calls, we've identified these issues, and we are appreciative of adjustments that they've made or their candor in describing some conditions that we have to deal with.
All right, good. So when we're looking at the causes of impasse that we're trying to avoid, which of these would doing that address? Perhaps this, it helps them trust our commitment level.
Yeah.
All right, what else?
The not listening. Well, if they're concerned that the mediator is not listening, this is evidence that the mediator is listening. But I think that's not what that, I think that may be,
That may
party
be,
is not listening.
yeah, that may be the communication stage.
Right.
All right.
There's always a concern of mediator bias. And I think these pre-calls, I agree with you, are very important. And part of it is just to show, well, I've got an open mind. I don't care whether you're a plaintiff or defendant. I think there are a number of things that can be said to make people comfortable about that.
So we're going to do more of this building trust as the mediator during that stage, right?
Right.
We might preempt quitting too soon at 9 a.m. by saying, look, here's what's going to happen today. And it's not unusual for you to feel this way at some point during the day. And when one of the things I do is I use a river rafting analogy. we all start off and it's a sunny day and we're in these rafts and there are like 6 people in each of these big rafts and we're having fun. Then we hit the whitewater rapids and the rafts start to go like this. When I've done that before, a guide has said, there are 2 things you have to do if you fall out of the raft. One is keep your feet pointed downstream, and the other is keep your rear end up so you don't scrape the bottom, if it's a shallow river right there or something. Before that, they say, trust me and listen to my directions. I've done these whitewater rapids before thousands of times, hundreds of times. I know how to get us through this. I need you to trust me as your guide. And so I equate that to mediation with them. And I ask them to trust me when the going gets tough. And I support that with the notion of how many times I've been through these white waters and survived, because my goal is to get them through the whitewater rapids and down to the end where the water is like glass and you can see the trees in the sky are reflecting in it and everything is calm and peaceful again. But sometimes to get there, we have to go through these white waters.
I think you can also add to that the lack of patience that kind of works with that, as well as the emotions, so that you can give them what to expect and that type of thing.
Good. I love nothing more than walking into a plaintiff's room in the morning and seeing that they've got a book that they brought to read. And I say, clearly your attorney has prepared you for this process today. Patience is going to be your friend. It's going to be a long day. And so we can do all those things to temper the emotions, to work on their tolerance for patience and manage their expectations around it, right?
You can also help further the understanding of the process.
Absolutely. And what does that do to avoid impasse?
Prepares people.
Yeah. And this one too, somebody mentioned earlier, letting them know it's not unusual to hit a point during the day where everybody feels like we're at an impasse, like we've hit a barrier that's so strong that we can't manage our way past it.
I also make sure that they understand that this is not a process where they walk in and say, well, this is my bottom line number and I'm not going to settle this case if it's not X.
Yeah.
I try to go through that and what they can expect and how long it's going to take and the number of moves, that kind of thing. Hopefully they're already heard it from their lawyer, but hearing it again helps.
Yes. So I do that in a very specific way. I say, if you think about it, everybody came here today looking for something. Even if it's something is just a release, it's the people on this screen right now, or it's the people sitting across the table from you right now who have what it is you came here for today. So where the litigation process is one of winning over your opponent, today is really different. You can't settle a case by yourself. You need them to give you what you came here for in order for you to get it. You haven't empowered me to reach into somebody's pocket and forcibly take what's theirs and give it to you. You have to get it from them. So today is a process much more about winning them over than it is about winning over them. And I encourage everyone to think about how you engage with each other during the day, even if it's in the hallways or the bathroom. Because the people that you're talking to who have been the enemy to this point in the litigation process, today are the ones who hold what you came here for. And so I'm trying to shift the paradigm in their minds in a very firm and deliberate way. I also tell them something else. I say, I want you to look at the attorneys at the table right now. There's going to come a time, and this may be preparing for impasse or preparing for the process. There's going to come a time where you're liable to look at your attorney. It might be midday today, around lunchtime, where you want to bang the table and say, why aren't you telling them they're wrong and all of that? And when your lawyer's not doing that, I want you to follow their lead and trust them, because they've been through this process dozens, if not hundreds of times before, and they know how to help you in this process. So if their response differs from what you think they should be doing, I want you to trust them and trust their experience in that moment. Secondly, I want you to look across the table at opposing counsel. I have no doubt that these 2 lawyers, or however many there are, could put you on the stand or under oath in your deposition and like Zorro with a sword cut you to ribbons and make you look like a fumbling idiot, no matter how smart you are, because they know how to do that in the litigation process. Here, for today's purposes, you're going to see a different behavior out of them. You're going to see a kinder, gentler side of them than you ever have before, and I can almost guarantee you than you ever will again after today. So my caution to you is, don't mistake kindness for weakness. They also understand what's required of this process, and you're going to see a different side of them today than you're used to, and I don't want you to let that cause you to underestimate them. So now, who was I really talking to?
The lawyers.
Absolutely, 100%, right? I'm telling the parties these admonishments, but truly what I'm doing is I'm telling the lawyers, here's what I expect of you today. And here's what I'm telling your clients to expect of you today. I've had so many lawyers pull me aside after my introduction as we're going into separate rooms and pull me aside and say, thank you so much. We all hate the dog and pony show, but the clients are the ones who want to see it. So you just took us off the hook so we don't have to do that. And thank you. So that's something about attorneys' different interests, right? They don't want to necessarily bang the drum and do all of that stuff. They just want to get the case settled for their client. So I give them the benefit of that doubt and I give them the out. So we're at the top of the hour. I'm going to encourage you, perhaps after the Zoom is over, to think about some of the things we just quickly talked about your introduction phase and how you introduce the process. And if there are some things that you want to do differently that will help you avoid some of these hurdles and causes of impasse later. And then, like I said, we'll send you the article that'll take you through the rest of these, but also think about what you can do differently and perhaps better during the communication stage and during the negotiation stage. You know, when we talk about mediator miscommunication and ego, during the communication stage, there are things that we can do to help with those things that we want to make sure we're doing. So hopefully we've given you some things to think about in this quick hour this morning. And I hope that you'll think about in more detail each part of your process and how you can improve it a little bit to avoid the causes of impasse that we're able to avoid. And I promise you, you'll start to see more cases settling that might not have if you didn't put that work into thinking through your process. I want to thank y'all for participating this morning, for having some fun with me, I'm going to stop the screen share here, for coming together to do this. Y'all are building a nice family here at Alterity, and it's nice to see you all coming together and doing this learning together.
Thank you so much, Lee, for being here with us. You actually hit on a number of the attributes that we define as what makes up great ADR. So really appreciate your time with us, and for everyone else that participated, thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you at the next roundtable, and Lee will send all the information that you share with today's participants.
Fantastic.
Thank you all.
Nice to see those of you I know, and nice to meet the rest.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, I could have managed the time a little better, but
You can stop the recording.
oh, thank you. Before I make my admissions.
I think it's still, is it still recording?